The massive space station floated quietly in the darkness of space, its lights twinkling like stars against the black void. Kepler Interspecies Academy was the most famous school in the known galaxy, a place where young beings from hundreds of different worlds came to learn about each other, and the vast universe they all shared. Inside one of the station's many classrooms, 12 students sat in specially designed chairs that could accommodate their different body types. Some were tall, some were short, some had tentacles instead of arms, and others had shells instead of skin. Each student came from a different planet, a different species. But they all shared one thing in common. They were all curious about the dangerous worlds that existed beyond their peaceful homes. Professor Vex High stood at the front of the classroom, her crystalline body catching the soft light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. She was old, even by Centaurian standards, and her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had spent centuries studying the galaxy's most frightening places. Her 4 arms moved gracefully as she spoke, each gesture emphasizing her words. "Welcome back to Deathworld studies," she said, her voice like the sound of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Today we begin our most advanced unit. We'll be studying the creatures that live on the galaxy's most dangerous planets." The students shifted nervously in their seats. They had spent months learning about hostile environments, studying planets where the very air could kill most life forms, where the ground itself was poisoned, where the weather could destroy entire cities in minutes. But learning about the places was one thing. Learning about the creatures that actually lived in those nightmare worlds was something else entirely. Zara, a young Etherean whose body looked like it was made of living glass, raised one delicate hand. "Professor, will we only be studying them through recordings and data files?" Her voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow summon one of these terrible creatures into their safe. Classroom Professor Vex High's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. "Actually, Zara, this semester will be quite different. We will have the opportunity to observe and interact with actual specimens." A collective gasp went through the room. Finn, a Verdani student whose green, plant-like body trembled with fear, spoke up. "You mean they're bringing actual predators here?" "To the station? Not just any predators," the professor replied. "We will be joined by 2 transfer students, real beings from real death worlds who have agreed to share their experiences with us." The room fell silent except for the gentle humming of the station's life support systems. The students looked at each other with wide eyes, tentacles quivering, and various appendages fidgeting nervously. They had signed up to study dangerous worlds from the safety of their classroom, not to actually meet the monsters that lived on them. Keel, an aquatic tidal folk whose translucent body rippled with bioluminescent patterns, spoke through the water-filled helmet that allowed him to survive in the station's atmosphere. "What kind of death worlds are we talking about, Professor?" Before Professor Vexai could answer, the classroom door slid open with a soft hiss. Every student immediately turned to look, and what they saw made several of them instinctively activate their personal protection devices. The creature that entered the room was enormous, stood over 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark scales that looked harder than military armor. Its head was long and narrow, filled with teeth that were clearly designed for tearing flesh. Yellow eyes with vertical pupils swept across the room, and the students could see the calculation behind them. The predatory intelligence that was sizing them up like potential prey. The creature's claws clicked against the metal floor as it walked, each step deliberate and controlled. Its tail, thick as a tree trunk and covered in spikes, swayed behind it with a hypnotic rhythm. When it opened its mouth to speak, the students could see rows of razor-sharp teeth and caught a whiff of something that smelled like sulfur and death. "I am Krathmer of the Scorian Pride," the creature said, its voice so deep it seemed to vibrate through the floor and into the students' bones. "I come from Scorian Prime, where the mountains breathe fire and the very rocks can kill you." 3 students immediately fainted. 2 others activated emergency beacons that would summon security if they felt threatened. The rest sat frozen in their chairs, afraid that any movement might trigger the predator's hunting instincts. Professor Vexai remained calm, gesturing for Krathmer to take the specially reinforced seat that had been prepared for him. "Class, Please welcome our first transfer student. Krathmer comes from a Class 7 Deathworld, where surface temperatures regularly exceed 200 degrees Celsius and the atmosphere contains compounds that would be lethal to most of us. Krathmer settled into his seat, which groaned under his weight. Despite being built to handle heavy loads, his movements were fluid and graceful, like a dancer. But every student in the room could sense the deadly power behind that grace. When he turned his head to look at them, several students instinctively ducked behind their desks. On my world, Krathmer continued, his yellow eyes reflecting the classroom lights, we hunt from the moment we can walk. The weak do not survive their first year. The strong learn to kill before they learn to speak. Zara, the Etherean student, made a small sound like breaking glass. Her transparent body was now flickering rapidly, a sign of extreme distress among her people. The Verdani student, Finn, had turned a sickly yellow color and was making quiet, whimpering sounds. My people are what you would call apex predators, Krathmer explained, apparently unaware of the terror he was causing. We have no natural enemies on Scorian Prime because we have killed them all. Our ancestors hunted the great fire lizards to extinction. We drove the metal-backed crawlers deep into the planet's core. Even the sky serpents learned to fear us. One of the Tidal Folk students suddenly activated his emergency transport beacon and disappeared in a flash of blue light, presumably returning to his homeworld. The remaining students pressed themselves against the back walls of the classroom. As far from Krathmer as they could get, Professor Vexhai raised one of her crystalline hands. Perhaps we should take a short break before continuing with introductions. Krathmer, would you mind waiting in the observation room while the class adjusts to your presence? The massive predator nodded and rose from his seat, causing two more students to activate their personal shields. As he walked toward the door, his tail accidentally knocked over a desk, which crumpled like paper under the impact. The sound of twisting metal echoed through the room like a death scream. I apologize, Krathmer said, looking back at the destroyed furniture. I sometimes forget how fragile things are away from my homeworld. After he left, the remaining students sat in stunned silence. The air still carried his scent, a mixture of sulfur, ozone, and something primal that made their fight or flight. Instincts screamed danger. Even with the predator gone, they could still feel the memory of those yellow eyes studying them, calculating their weaknesses. Professor Vexhai waited patiently for her students to recover. She had expected this reaction. Krathmer was, by any reasonable standard, a terrifying creature. His species had evolved on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, and it showed in every aspect of his being, from his armored scales to his razor, claws from his acidic saliva to his infrared vision. He was a perfect killing machine. Now, she said gently, I should mention that we have one more transfer student joining us. They should arrive in a few days. The remaining students looked at each other with expressions of pure horror. If Krathmer was just the first of their new classmates, what kind of nightmare creature would be joining them next? 3 days had passed since Krathmer joined the class. The students were still adjusting to having a real predator among them. The massive creature from Scorian Prime had tried to be friendly, but every time he spoke, his deep voice made the smaller students shake when he smiled, showing his rows of deadly teeth. At least one student would faint. The classroom had been rearranged to give everyone more space. Krathmer now sat in the back corner in a specially built chair that could handle his weight and size. The other students had moved their desks as far away as possible, while still being able to see Professor Vexhai. At the front of the room, only 8 students remained from the original 12. The others had either been hospitalized from stress or had requested emergency transfers back to their homeworlds. Even the brave ones who stayed kept personal shields activated at all times and jumped at every sound Krathmer made. Professor Vexhai was discussing the atmospheric conditions of various death worlds when the classroom door chimed. Everyone turned to look, and several students immediately activated their emergency beacons, expecting another terrifying monster to walk through the door instead. A figure that looked almost disappointingly ordinary stepped into the room. New student was much smaller than Krathmer, standing only about 6 feet tall. He had smooth skin instead of scales, no visible claws, and no armor plating, His hair was brown and messy, like he had just woken up. His eyes were a warm brown color, not the cold yellow of a predator. He wore simple clothes that looked comfortable rather than protective. "Sorry I'm late," the newcomer said, his voice quiet and friendly. "I got a bit lost trying to find this room. The station is huge." The students looked at each other in confusion. This was their second transfer student. This ordinary-looking creature was supposed to be from a death world. He looked like he could barely hurt a small insect, let alone survive on a dangerous planet. Professor Vexai smiled, her crystalline features reflecting the relief that was spreading through the classroom. "Please welcome Jake Martinez. He comes to us from Earth." Jake waved at the other students with a friendly smile. "Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all." He looked around the room and noticed how the students were all pressed against the far walls. "Are you all okay? You look a bit stressed?" Zara, the Etherean student, flickered nervously. "We were expecting another predator," she whispered, her glass-like body still trembling from the past few days of terror. Jake looked confused. "Another predator? Oh, you mean like Krathmer over there?" He turned and waved at the massive reptilian creature in the corner. "Hey there, big guy. I'm Jake." Students gasped. Jake had turned his back on an apex predator and was treating him like a friendly neighbor. Either this human was incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Krathmer's CLO eyes focused on Jake with interest. "Greetings, small one. You show no fear. This is unusual." Jake shrugged. "Why should I be afraid? You seem nice enough." He walked over to an empty desk near the middle of the room and sat down. "So what are we studying today?" The other students stared in amazement. Not only was Jake not afraid of Krathmer, but he had actually moved closer to the predator instead of farther away. Even more shocking, he seemed completely relaxed and comfortable. Professor Vexai consulted her datapad. "Jake, according to your file, you come from a planet called Earth. The database shows it as a Class 12 death world. That's our highest classification." Several students made sounds of disbelief. Krathmer came from a Class 7 death world, and he was the most terrifying creature they had ever seen. How could this friendly, ordinary-looking human come from an even more dangerous planet? "Yeah, Earth's got some challenges," Jake said casually. "But it's home, you know. You learn to deal with it." Finn, the Verdani student, raised a shaky green. "Appendage. What kind of challenges?" His voice was barely audible, as if he was afraid of the answer. Jake thought for a moment. "Well, let's see. The weather can be pretty extreme. In winter, it gets down to about -40 degrees in some places. In summer, it can hit 50 degrees Celsius in the deserts. Then there are the storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards. Oh, and earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts." With each word Jake spoke, the students' eyes grew wider. -40 degrees? That would freeze most of them solid in seconds. 50 degrees Celsius would cook many of them alive. And he was talking about these deadly conditions like they were minor inconveniences. "But that's just the weather," Jake continued, apparently not noticing the growing horror on his classmates' faces. "The real fun starts with the wildlife. We've got bears, tigers, sharks, crocodiles, poisonous snakes, spiders the size of dinner, plates, jellyfish that can kill you with a touch, and mosquitoes that carry diseases." Keel, the Tidal Folk student, made a gurgling sound of distress inside his water-filled helmet. "Mosquitoes?" he managed to ask. "Oh yeah, tiny flying insects that bite you and suck your blood," Jake explained cheerfully. "They're everywhere in the summer. Really annoying. Some of them carry malaria, yellow fever, dengue, Zika virus. They kill about 1 million people a year." The classroom fell silent, except for the sound of several students hyperventilating. 1 million deaths per year, from tiny flying creatures? And Jake was talking about them like they were just a minor annoyance? Professor Vexai leaned forward with interest. "Jake, you mentioned that these conditions are normal on your world. How do humans survive in such an environment?" Jake looked confused by the question. "Survive? We don't just survive. We live all over the planet. There are humans in the frozen north, in the burning deserts, on tiny islands, in the mountains. Underground, even in research stations in the coldest places on Earth. We've got cities with millions of people in them. Cities, Zara whispered. You mean large populations of humans living together in these deadly conditions? Oh, sure, Jake nodded. The biggest city on Earth has over 30 million people. And that's in a place where we have to deal with earthquakes, typhoons, and air pollution. Most humans live in cities, actually. It's more convenient. The students looked at each other in growing alarm. This wasn't making sense. Jake looked so normal, so fragile. Skin was soft. He had no claws, no fangs, no armor. Yet he was describing survival in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. Krathmer spoke up from his corner, his deep voice rumbling through the room. Small one, you speak of your world as if these dangers are nothing, yet you appear to have no natural weapons, no protective covering. How does your species defend itself? Jake turned to look at the massive predator. Oh, we're pretty good at making tools. And we work together a lot. Humans are really good at cooperation and problem solving. Tools? Professor Vexai asked. Weapons, vehicles, buildings, medicine, technology. We're not the biggest or strongest or fastest, but we're smart and we don't give up easily. He paused and pulled out a small device from his pocket. This is a communication device. It can connect me to any other human on Earth instantly. It also has access to all of human knowledge, can take pictures, play music, and about 1,000 other things. The students stared at the small device in Jake's hand. It looked so simple, yet he claimed it could do things that would require massive computers on most of their worlds. But the really useful stuff is the bigger technology, Jake continued. We've got vehicles that can travel anywhere on the planet. Buildings that can withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. Medicine that can cure diseases that used to kill millions of people. Finn made a small whimpering sound. He said used to kill millions. How many do they kill now? Well, most of those diseases don't kill anyone anymore, Jake said. We figured out how to prevent them or cure them. Humans are really good at solving problems when we work together. Classroom was completely silent now. Even Krathmer seemed to be studying Jake with new interest. His predatory instincts telling him that there was more to this small, seemingly helpless creature than met. The eye, Professor Vexai, made some notes on her datapad. Jake, when you say humans are good at not giving up, what do you mean exactly? Jake smiled. Well, if something is a problem, we keep working on it until we solve it. It might take years or decades or even centuries, but we don't quit. We spent thousands of years figuring out how to fly, and now we travel between stars. We spent centuries learning about diseases, and now we can cure things that used to wipe out entire populations. He looked around the room at the frightened faces of his classmates. Are you guys okay? You all look kind of pale. Well, except for you, Krathmer. You look the same as always. The massive predator made a sound that might have been laughter. I am beginning to understand why your world carries such a high classification. A small one. Jake shrugged. I guess it's all about perspective. Earth seems normal to me because it's all I've ever known. I'm sure your world would seem pretty intense to me at first. My world would kill you in minutes, Krathmer said matter-of-factly. Maybe, Jake agreed. But give me some time to study it, some tools, and a few other humans to work with, and I bet we could figure out how to survive there too. That's what humans do. The students exchanged glances, a new kind of fear beginning to creep into their minds. This wasn't the obvious, terrifying danger that Krathmer represented. Over the next week, Jake's presence in the classroom became even more unsettling for the other students. It wasn't because he was threatening like Krathmer, who still made everyone nervous with his size and obvious weapons. Instead, it was the things Jake said without thinking, the casual comments that revealed just how deadly his home world really was. During a lesson about atmospheric pressure, Professor Vexai was explaining how most life forms needed very specific conditions to survive. She pointed to a chart showing the pressure ranges that different species could tolerate. As you can see, she said, most civilized species evolved on worlds with atmospheric pressure between 0.5 and 1.2 standard units. Anything higher than 1.5 units would crush most of us. Jake raised his hand. What's considered standard pressure? Professor Vexai checked her notes. Standard pressure is based on the average of all known civilized worlds. It's roughly equivalent to the pressure you would find at high altitude on most garden worlds, Jake said, looking confused. So what would you call the pressure at sea level on Earth? The professor consulted her database, and her crystalline features seemed to dim with shock. According to this, sea level pressure on Earth is 2.3 standard units. The other students gasped. Zara the Etherean made a sound like cracking glass. That would crush us flat. Jake looked genuinely surprised. Really? But that's where most humans live. I grew up in a city that was right at sea level. It felt perfectly normal. Finn, the Verdani student, was turning an even more sickly shade of yellow. How do you breathe in such crushing pressure? We just do, Jake shrugged. I never really thought about it. I mean, when you go up to high mountains, the air gets thinner and it's harder to breathe. But down at sea level, everything works fine. Krathmer spoke from his corner, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake with growing interest. On my world, the pressure is only 1.8 standard units, and we consider that to be crushing force. You are saying humans evolved in even more extreme conditions? Guess so, Jake said. Though we don't really think of it as extreme, it's just normal for us. The next day brought an even more disturbing revelation. The class was studying temperature extremes when Professor Vexhai asked each student to describe the climate range their species could survive in. Zara went first. Her glass-like body flickering nervously. Therians can survive between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius. Anything outside that range, and our crystalline structure becomes unstable. Finn was next. Verdani can handle 10 to 30 degrees, but we prefer around 22 degrees for optimal growth. Keel, the tidal folk, bubbled through his water helmet. We need temperatures between 8 and 18 degrees. Warmer water doesn't hold enough oxygen for us to breathe. Even Krathmer, the feared predator, had limits. My people can survive 40 to 180 degrees Celsius, but we are most comfortable around 120 degrees. Then it was Jake's turn. Well, humans live pretty much everywhere on Earth. The coldest permanent settlement is in Antarctica, where it gets down to -60 degrees Celsius in winter. The hottest place where people live regularly is Death Valley, where it hits about 50 degrees Celsius in summer. Professor Vexhai stopped writing on her board. Jake, are you saying humans can survive in temperatures ranging from -60 to +50 degrees Celsius? Oh, that's just the places where people live all year round, Jake said. Humans have survived much more extreme temperatures for short periods. Arctic explorers have dealt with -70 degrees. People working in some industrial settings handle much higher temperatures than 50 degrees. The classroom fell silent. The temperature range Jake had just described was wider than what any other three species combined could handle. And he was talking about it like it was perfectly normal. Zara made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. But how? How do you survive such extremes? Jake thought for a moment. Mostly we just adapt our behavior and our tools. In cold places, we wear warm clothes and build heated shelters. In hot places, we wear light clothes and find ways to stay cool. We also just get used to it over time. You adapt to the environment instead of the environment adapting to you. Keel gurgled in amazement. Yeah, pretty much, Jake nodded. If a place is too cold, we make it warmer. If it's too hot, we make it cooler. If there's no water, we bring water. If the air is bad, we clean it or bring our own. Humans are really good at changing things to suit our needs. The most frightening revelation came during a discussion about food and nutrition. Professor Vexhai was explaining how most species had very specific dietary requirements and how the wrong foods could be deadly. For example, she said, the compound capsaicin is considered a chemical weapon by most galactic standards. Even tiny amounts can cause severe pain and tissue damage. Jake perked up. Oh, you mean like hot peppers? I love spicy food. The hotter, the better. Every student in the room turned to stare at him. Krathmer's eyes narrowed to slits. You consume capsaicin for pleasure? Professor Vexa asked, her voice filled with disbelief. All the time, Jake said cheerfully. I probably eat something spicy every day. Last night, I had these really hot wings that made my eyes water and my nose run. They were delicious. A was making quiet whimpering sounds. You eat chemical weapons for fun? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds weird, Jake laughed. But humans love all kinds of foods that are probably toxic to other species. Coffee, chocolate, alcohol, garlic, onions. Oh, and we eat meat from animals that could kill us if we don't prepare it right. What do you mean? Zara whispered. Well, like pufferfish. It's got enough poison in it to kill 30 people. But if you prepare it just right, it's considered a delicacy. Or raw oysters from the ocean. They can carry all kinds of bacteria and parasites, but people eat them alive. The students were now looking at Jake with the same fear they had shown Krathmer, but for completely different reasons. The massive predator was obviously dangerous, but at least his danger was straightforward. Jake represented something far more disturbing, a creature that had evolved to thrive in conditions that would kill them all. And who considered deadly toxins to be tasty snacks? Professor Vexai decided to push further. Jake, can you tell us about human physical capabilities? How strong are humans compared to other species? Jake shrugged. We're not the strongest animals on Earth, that's for sure. We're pretty good at endurance. Humans are persistence hunters. What does that mean? Keel asked nervously. It means we chase our prey until it collapses from exhaustion, Jake explained matter-of-factly. Humans can run for hours and hours without stopping. We're not fast, but we never give up. Just keep following until the animal gets too tired to run anymore. The classroom was completely silent now. Even Krathmer seemed disturbed by this revelation. You hunt by chasing prey to death. The massive predator asked, his voice unusually quiet. Well, that's how our ancestors did it, Jake. Said these days, we mostly just run for exercise. But yeah, humans are built for endurance. We can walk or run for days if we need to. Our bodies are designed to keep going even when we're tired, hungry, or hurt. Zara was flickering so rapidly she looked like a strobe light. You never stop? You just keep coming? Pretty much, Jake nodded. That's kind of the human way. Something is in our path. We either go through it, around it, over it, or under it. But we don't usually stop. Professor Vexi made more notes on her datapad. She was beginning to understand why Earth carried the highest Deathworld classification. It wasn't just the environment that was deadly. It was the creatures that had evolved to not just survive in that environment, but to dominate it completely. Jake, she said carefully, you mentioned that humans are good at cooperation. Can you give us an example? Jake thought for a moment. Well, when there's a big problem, humans from all over the world work together to solve it. Like, if there's a natural disaster, people will travel thousands of miles to help strangers they've never met. Or, if there's a disease outbreak, scientists from hundreds of countries will share information and work together to find a cure. But what about when humans disagree with each other? Finn asked weakly. Jake's expression grew more serious. Oh, when humans fight each other, it can get pretty intense. We've had wars that lasted for years, sometimes decades. We've developed weapons that can destroy entire cities, even entire continents. But mostly, we try to solve disagreements peacefully these days. The students exchanged terrified glances. This creature that looked so harmless, so friendly, came from a species that had developed weapons capable of destroying continents, and he was talking about it like it was just another interesting fact about his people. As the class ended and students began to file out, they gave Jake an even wider berth than they gave Krathmer. The massive predator might tear them apart with his claws, but at least that would be quick. Jake represented something far more terrifying, a species that never stopped, never gave up, and had turned an entire death world into their personal playground. Professor Vexai watched her students leave, noting how they now seemed equally afraid of both transfer students, though for very different reasons. The lesson was proceeding exactly as she had hoped. True meaning of apex predator. The field trip to the station's environmental simulation chambers was supposed to be the highlight of the semester. Professor Vexai had arranged for each student to demonstrate their natural abilities in environments that matched their home worlds. It was meant to be educational and fun, a chance for the different species to show off what made them special. The simulation deck was enormous, taking up 3 full levels of the space station. Each chamber could recreate the exact conditions of any known world, from atmosphere and gravity to weather patterns and terrain. The students gathered in the observation area, looking through protective barriers at the various chambers that had been prepared. Today, each of you will have the opportunity to demonstrate your species' natural advantages, Professor Vexai announced. We'll start with environments that are comfortable for our students, then move to the more challenging simulations. First demonstration was with Keel, the Tidal Folk student. His chamber was filled with the cool, oxygen-rich waters of his homeworld. Through the transparent barriers, the other students watched as Keel moved through the water with incredible grace. His translucent body pulsed with beautiful bioluminescent patterns as he demonstrated how his people communicated underwater. He could change direction instantly, swim at amazing speeds, and his natural sonar allowed him to navigate in complete darkness. Impressive, Jake said, watching Keel glide through the water. Humans are okay swimmers, but nothing like that. Next was Finn's turn in the forest chamber. The Verdani student's plant-like body immediately began to glow with health in the perfect growing conditions. He showed how his people could communicate with other plants, how they could photosynthesize sunlight directly into energy, and how they could sense the health of an entire ecosystem just by touching the ground. That's really cool, Jake commented. Humans have to eat food to get energy. Being able to make it directly from sunlight would save a lot of time. Zara went next in a chamber filled with the crystalline formations of her home world. The Etherian student's glass-like body began to resonate with the crystal structures around her, creating beautiful musical tones. She demonstrated how her people could communicate through harmonic frequencies and how they could store and share memories in crystal matrices. Beautiful, Jake said, genuinely impressed. Humans make music too, but we have to use instruments. Being able to make music with your whole body must be amazing. Then came Krathmer's turn, and the mood in the observation area immediately became tense. The volcanic chamber was configured to match Scorian prime temperatures over 150 degrees Celsius, an atmosphere filled with sulfuric compounds, a landscape of razor-sharp volcanic glass and flowing lava. The massive predator entered the chamber and immediately seemed to come alive. His scales, which had looked dark and dull in the classroom, now gleamed with an inner fire. He moved across the burning landscape with incredible speed and grace. Leaping over lava flows and climbing sheer cliff faces with ease, his claws could grip the volcanic glass without being cut. And he breathed the toxic atmosphere as easily as the students breathed the station's filtered air. Now that is impressive, Jake said, watching Krathmer hunt a simulated prey animal through the hellish environment. He's perfectly adapted to that world. I bet it would take humans months to figure out how to survive in there, even with our best equipment. The other students were pressed against the back wall of the observation area as far from the chamber as possible. Even through the protective barriers, watching Krathmer in his natural element was terrifying. This was what an apex predator looked like when it was truly in its element. Then Professor Vexai activated the chamber's emergency scenarios. Sudden volcanic eruptions, toxic gas clouds, and seismic activity began to rock the simulated world. The students expected Krathmer to retreat to safety, but instead he seemed to enjoy the chaos. He used the eruptions to launch himself to higher ground, avoided the gas clouds with fluid movements, and rode out the earthquakes by digging his claws into the rock. Incredible, Professor Vexai said, making notes. Krathmer's species doesn't just survive in extreme conditions, they thrive in them. Finally, it was Jake's turn. The students had been dreading this moment all week. If Jake's casual descriptions of Earth were accurate, then the chamber was about to show them conditions that would kill most of them instantly. Are you sure about this? Zara asked nervously. According to the database, Earth's standard environment is classified as extremely lethal to most known life forms. Jake looked confused. Really? It's just regular Earth? I grew up there? Professor Vexai activated the Earth simulation chamber, and immediately every student in the observation area activated their emergency shields. The chamber's atmospheric. Readings appeared on the displays, and several students made sounds of horror. The gravity was crushing, nearly twice what most species could handle. The atmospheric pressure was dense enough to kill many of them instantly. Oxygen levels were so high, they would be toxic to most life forms. The chamber was configured to show a mild Earth environment, a temperate forest on a pleasant spring day. To the students watching, it looked like a nightmare. The gravity reading alone would have flattened most of them. The atmospheric composition would have poisoned them in minutes. Even the pleasant temperature of 20 degrees Celsius was outside the comfort range of half the species present. Jake entered the chamber and immediately relaxed. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he looked completely comfortable and at ease. He took a deep breath of the toxic atmosphere and smiled. "Oh, this feels like home," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication system. What happened next made the students question everything they thought they knew about Deathworlds and the creatures that lived on them. Jake began what he called basic outdoor skills. He gathered some dry wood and started a fire using nothing but sticks and friction. The students watched in amazement as he created flames in an environment that would kill most of them using tools. So primitive they seemed like toys. Then he built a shelter using branches and leaves, weaving them together with his bare hands. In minutes, he had created a structure that would protect him from wind, rain, and temperature changes. He did it all while moving easily in gravity that would crush most of the observers. "This is just basic camping stuff," Jake explained. He worked. Every human kid learns this kind of thing, in case you get lost in the woods or something. The students exchanged terrified glances. Human children learn to survive in conditions that would kill trained adult specialists from other species. Professor Vexhai decided to activate the chamber's emergency scenarios, just as she had done with Krathmer. Suddenly, the pleasant forest environment became a survival nightmare. The temperature dropped to near freezing, rain began to fall in torrents, and wind speeds increased to dangerous levels. The students expected Jake to retreat to safety or call for help. Instead, he calmly adjusted his shelter to handle the rain, built up his fire to stay warm, and settled in to wait out the storm. He even started humming a little tune while he worked. "This is actually kind of nice," Jake said conversationally. "Reminds me of camping trips when I was a kid. My dad used to take me and my brothers out in weather like this." He said it built character. Zara was flickering so rapidly, she looked like she was about to explode. "He's treating lethal conditions like a fun childhood memory." But the real shock came when Professor Vexhai activated the chamber's predator simulation. A large, aggressive creature materialized in the forest, something like a cross between a bear and a tiger, with claws the length of knives and teeth designed for tearing flesh. The students screamed and pressed against the barriers, certain they were about to watch Jake being torn apart. Even Krathmer leaned forward with interest. Wondering how the small human would handle a real threat, Jake looked up at the approaching predator and sighed. Well, that's not good. He picked up a sturdy branch from near his fire and stood up, slowly keeping the flames between himself and the creature. What followed was not the brutal fight the students expected. Instead, Jake began to move in a way that seemed almost like a dance. He used the fire to keep the predator at a distance, threw rocks to confuse it, and made loud noises to intimidate it. When the creature tried to charge, Jake stepped aside at the last second and struck it with his improvised club. It wasn't the raw power of Krathmer's hunting style. Instead, it was something far more disturbing, a calculated, intelligent approach to violence. Jake wasn't stronger or faster than the predator, but he was smarter. He used tools, tactics, and the environment itself as weapons. After several minutes, the simulated predator retreated, confused and frustrated by this strange prey that refused to act like prey. Jake sat back down by his fire and resumed humming his tune. Well, that was exciting, he said casually. Good thing it was just one of them. They're usually more dangerous when they hunt in packs. The observation area was completely silent. The students had just watched Jake turn a lethal survival scenario into what looked like a slightly annoying interruption to his camping trip. Professor Vexhai made extensive notes while studying the chamber's readings. The final week of the semester had arrived, and it was time for the students to give their presentations. Each student was required to present a report on the most dangerous predator from their home world. It was meant to be the culmination of everything they had learned about Deathworlds and the creatures that lived on them. The remaining students sat nervously in their seats. Only 6 of the original 12 were left. The others had either transferred to different courses or returned to their homeworlds. Unable to cope with the stress of sharing a classroom with creatures from actual Deathworlds, Professor Vexai stood at the front of the classroom, her crystalline body reflecting the soft lights. Today you will each present your research on apex predators. We'll start with Krathmer, then work our way through the class. The massive reptilian predator rose from his reinforced chair in the corner. His presentation screen activated, showing images that made several students immediately look away. The pictures showed creatures that looked like nightmares, made real. Massive beasts with claws like swords, teeth like daggers, and eyes that burned with predatory intelligence. The apex predator of Scorian Prime is the Great Fire Lizard, Krathmer began, his deep voice rumbling through the room. They grow to 30 feet in length and can breathe flames hot enough to melt steel. Their scales are harder than military armor, and their claws can cut through solid rock. The students listened in horrified fascination as Krathmer described how these creatures hunted. They were ambush predators that could hide in lava flows, waiting for prey to come close enough to strike. They could survive direct hits from military weapons and had been known to destroy entire settlements when they decided to hunt in populated areas. My people have been at war with the great fire lizards for thousands of years, Krathmer continued. We are the only species on Scorian Prime that can fight them and win, but even we fear them. Single fire lizard can kill dozens of my people before it is brought down. When Krathmer finished, the other students were pale and shaking. The creatures he had described were monsters from their worst nightmares, and he had spoken about them like they were just another part of life on his world. Zara went next, her glass-like body flickering nervously as she spoke about the crystal devourers of her homeworld. These creatures were parasites that could burrow into crystalline beings like herself and slowly consume them from the inside. They were nearly invisible and could remain dormant for years before striking. Finn described the root rot plague, fungal infection that could take over plant-based life forms and turn them into zombie-like creatures that spread the infection to others. His green skin had turned a sickly yellow just from talking about it. Keel spoke about the deep hunters, massive predators that lived in the deepest parts of his world's oceans. They were so large that they had never been fully seen, only glimpsed in parts. They could swallow entire schools of fish in one bite and had been known to attack underwater cities. Each presentation was more terrifying than the last. The students described creatures that seemed to come from the deepest, darkest fears of civilized beings. Monsters that hunted in ways that no sane creature should have to face. Finally, it was Jake's turn. The humans stood up slowly, and every student in the room tensed. After everything they had learned about Earth and its deadly conditions, they were terrified to hear about the apex predator that had evolved on such a horrific world. Jake activated his presentation screen, and the students braced themselves for images of some unimaginable monster. Instead, they saw a picture of a creature that looked remarkably similar to Jake himself. It walked on 2 legs, had no visible claws or fangs, no armor plating, no obvious weapons at all. The apex predator of Earth is called Homo sapiens, Jake began quietly. That's the scientific name for humans. The students looked at each other in confusion. Jake was presenting on his own species. That didn't make sense. Surely there were more dangerous creatures on Earth than humans. At first glance, humans don't look very dangerous, Jake continued. We're not the biggest, strongest, or fastest creatures on our planet. We don't have claws, fangs, or natural armor. We can't breathe underwater or fly through the air. Humans have something that makes them more dangerous than any other predator on Earth. He clicked to the next slide, showing a simple image of a human brain. Intelligence. The ability to think, plan, and work together to solve problems. This is what makes humans the ultimate predator. Jake's presentation took a darker turn as he began to explain how humans had dominated their planet. He showed how early humans had used simple tools to hunt creatures many times their size. how they had used fire to drive entire herds of animals off cliffs, how they had developed weapons that could kill from great distances. Humans are persistence hunters, Jake explained. We don't give up. Ever. If we decide we want something, we will keep trying until we get it, no matter how long it takes or how many obstacles we face. The students were beginning to understand the true horror of what Jake was describing. This wasn't about physical strength or natural weapons. This was about something far more terrifying: intelligence applied to the purpose of hunting and killing. Early humans killed off most of the large animals on Earth. Jake continued matter of factly. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, cave bears, saber-toothed cats. If it was big and dangerous, humans hunted it until it was extinct. Zara made a sound like breaking glass. You killed off your own planet's megafauna? Most of it, yeah, Jake nodded. Humans are really good at eliminating threats. If something is dangerous to us, we don't just avoid it, we remove it completely. The presentation grew even more disturbing as Jake began to discuss human warfare. He showed how humans had developed increasingly sophisticated ways to kill each other, from simple clubs and spears to weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. The scariest thing about human warfare is that we don't just fight for territory or resources, Jake explained. Sometimes we fight over ideas. Humans will kill each other over concepts like religion, politics, or philosophy. Krathmer spoke up from his corner, his voice unusually quiet. You wage war over thoughts? Sometimes, Jake said. Humans have fought wars that lasted for decades, sometimes centuries. We've killed millions of each other over disagreements about how society should work or what we should believe. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the station's life support system seemed to have gone quiet. But the really scary part about humans isn't the wars we fight against each other, Jake continued. It's what happens when we work together. When humans cooperate, we can accomplish almost anything. He showed images of human cities, spaceships, and technology that seemed impossible to the students. Structures that reached into the sky, vehicles that could travel between stars, machines that could think and learn. In just a few thousand years, humans went from using stone tools to traveling between planets. We've split the atom, cured diseases that killed millions, and developed technology that lets us reshape entire worlds to suit our needs. Jake clicked. To his final slide, showed a simple image of Earth from space, a blue and green world that looked peaceful and beautiful. The thing that makes humans the ultimate apex predator isn't our strength or our weapons. It's that we never stop, we never give up, and we never accept that something is impossible. If there's a problem, we solve it. If there's an obstacle, we overcome it. If there's a threat, we eliminate it. He looked around the room at his terrified classmates. We've turned the most dangerous planet in the galaxy into our home. We've eliminated most of the threats that could kill us. And now we're spreading. 2 other worlds because our own planet has become too easy for us. The silence that followed was deafening. The students sat frozen in their chairs, finally understanding the true nature of the creature that had been sitting among them all semester. Jake wasn't just from a death world. He was the apex predator of that death world, and his species had dominated it so completely that they were now looking for new challenges. Professor Vexhai finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Jake. That was very informative. As the class ended and students began to leave, they gave Jake an even wider space than they had ever given Krathmer. The massive reptilian predator might be able to kill them with his claws, but at least he was honest about his nature. Jake represented something far more terrifying, a species that looked harmless but had conquered the most dangerous world in the galaxy through intelligence, persistence, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Krathmer approached Jake as the other students fled the classroom. A small one, he said, his yellow eyes studying the human with new respect. I understand now why your world carries the highest death world classification. Jake looked surprised. Really? I always thought it was because of the weather and the animals. No, Krathmer said quietly. It's because of you, your species. You are the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, and you don't even realize it. Jake shrugged, shouldering his simple backpack. I guess everyone's perspective is different. To me, you guys all seem pretty amazing. I mean, you can survive in environments that would kill me. You have natural abilities I could never match. But we accept our limitations, Krathmer replied.